Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Taco Society Presents. I'm here with my co-host Sydney. How are you, Sydney?
How are you over there?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. Hello.
I know.
Phil is out tonight, this evening, this episode. He's got something to do at home that needs his attention, so he asked for forgiveness and said he'll be back next month.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
We'll see about Phil, huh? We're going to have a very short introduction because we've got some really good guests coming in tonight, some great guests. We're going to be talking about the Twisted Book of Shadows, and we've got John McIllveen, Jim Moore,
the great
James A. Moore,
yeah,
and Christopher Golden.
You had to think for a second.
No, I didn't. I knew. I will also say before we get to our guests that we're both very sad and really we're having a tough time. But if you're watching this, well, you will be watching this later. But Jack Ketchum, Dallas Marr, passed away today, and we love Jack.
All of us. He was so lovable. He was so involved in everything and went everywhere and
the nicest guy in the world.
Very humble.
Yeah, his passing really hit a lot of us hard. So rest in peace, Jack, and
we'll miss you.
We'll miss you, and we'll be back in a moment. Thank you. We're back, and we're here with some great guests, brothers, really.
VIPs.
Yes. John McIllveen from Havel House Publishing, the great James A. Moore, who will tell you an awful lot about. I can't sum him up in one sentence. But what I'll do is I'm going to start with John's bio, and then you go into Jim's,
Sure.
and then we'll start with questions.
Sounds great.
Good, okay. John McIllveen is the author of the paranormal suspense novel Hannaware, nominated for the 2015 Bram Stoker Award by the Horror Writers Association, and winner of Ireland's 2015 Drunken Druid Award. That sounds great. I don't know what it is, but it sounds great.
It sounds Irish. Drunken.
As well as two short story collections, Inflictions and Jerks. He is father to 5 daughters, and they're great little girls, or big girls now.
Big girls.
Yeah. And he's also editor-in-chief of Havel House Publishing and works at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory. He lives in Haverhill, Massachusetts, with his beautiful wife, Roberta Colasanti.
Colasanti, yes.
Yeah. You're up.
Okay, great. The great James A. Moore is the author of over 40 novels, including the critically acclaimed Fireworks, Under the Overtree, Blood Red, Blood Harvest, the Serenity Falls trilogy, which features his recurring anti-hero Jonathan Crowley, Cherry Hill, Alien, Sea of Sorrows, and the Seven Forges series of novels. He has twice been nominated for the Bram Stoker Award and spent 3 years as an officer in the Horror Writers Association, first as secretary and then later as vice president. Never one to stay in one genre for too long, James has recently written epic fantasy novels in the series Seven Forges, including Seven Forges, The Blasted Lands, City of Wonders, and The Silent Army. He is working on a new series called The Tides of War. The first book in the series, The Last Sacrifice, came out this past January, and the sequel, Fallen Gods, is due out in late December. His most recent release is a Griffin and Price novel co-written with Charles R. Rutledge called A Hell Within. Jim also has an apocalyptic sci-fi novel tentatively called Spores, coming soon. Woo!
Welcome, gentlemen. Yeah, isn't that something?
Yeah.
Catch your breath.
Show off.
Yeah.
Show off.
You both have a lot going on and a lot to
Oh yeah, with
Yeah,
Haverhill.
to be proud
Haverhill
of.
House alone, you've.
you gotta say Haverhill.
Haverhill.
Yeah,
You could've spent,
I'll
long
call
time.
you on that.
Please do. We're going to start with you, John, if that's all right. We're here to discuss the new anthology from Havel House. It's called The Twisted Book of Shadows,
Forthcoming.
forthcoming. we'd first like to focus on the premise of the anthology. Can you tell us what type of stories you're looking for? For instance, genre, word length, and the submission period.
Well, what we're looking for is horror stories, of course. We're not in the market for anything blatantly gory or. If you're familiar with the Charles Grant series Shadows, and Stuart David Schiff had a series called Whispers. It's
Remember both of them,
Yep. All three of us, Chris, Jim, and myself, are fans of that, especially that era of short story. And you can chime in anytime you like.
Charlie Grant was particularly adept with quiet horror. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's nothing going on. It just means that you don't have somebody wielding an axe and splitting skulls in every
Right.
scene.
yeah. It's not gory and,
Right.
yeah.
It's
Quiet
the
horror
kind
is
of
great.
horror that just runs chills down
Yeah.
your spine instead.
It sticks with you later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, because you will get a lot of different type of submissions.
Oh,
Some
absolutely.
of them are going to be absolutely quiet horror, like you say, and some of them won't.
If it's not quiet horror, it just better be a really good story.
Yeah. Okay.
That's one of the big challenges.
What about word length?
3,000 to 7,000
Yeah.
words.
Idealistically, 5,000,
Yeah.
in that area. But if it's, the way Chris says it, if it's 8,000, 10,000, it better be damn good, and we will accept something if it's really something spectacular. But 3,000 should
3
be
to 5, yeah.
3 and beyond is
Okay.
what you should aim for.
So a minimum of 3.
Minimum of 3, yes.
Okay.
So no flash
Um,
fiction.
No.
No, it's we want to make sure that the stories are stories,
Fleshed
not
out.
just vignettes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good way to put it. How about the submission period?
That's a good question. I think it's beginning of February.
Beginning of
until-
February till the end of February for this year.
Right, so the 1 month. If whoever's watching, pick up a copy of Shadows, pick up a copy of Whispers, and that'll give you a good idea.
The type of story you're looking
Yes,
for?
yes.
Jim, I got a question for you. You guys have established a really unique way of judging the submissions. Fill us in on this review process.
Okay, well, first off, it's blind submissions. And what that means is that we have somebody who's going to take away all the names that are sent with the stories and everything else and keep a record of them. What we will see is the story, no names attached to it, so that we can't have a bias. Additionally, we also have a group of judges who are going to be working with us on this. And what they're primarily going to be doing is reading for content and reading for story and making sure that we are as diverse as possible in the process of choosing stories.
And the
Diverse meaning,
And content.
no gender,
Oh.
race,
Oh,
everything.
oh.
And what are there, 7?
I believe it's 7.
Yeah.
I don't have the list with me right
and
now.
about
but
a diverse collection of people as you could get. And part of the thought process behind Jim, Chris, and myself are all cisgender white guys, middle-aged white guys.
Yeah.
And even if we don't want the bias, we may unconsciously have a bias that, we don't want to take that chance.
That's really great.
better to have a group working with us who's going to call us if we're being foolish.
so you've got a blind submission, so you have no idea whether someone's a female, a male,
Correct.
black,
Or someone
white,
they know.
yeah,
We've
or a
Friend.
friend,
Right.
yeah.
Very hard to encourage as many diverse groups as possible to submit to this
Yeah.
because we want it to be a full spectrum of people who are submitting to us.
So on top of the blind submissions, you've got a group of reviewers or critiquers that literally are diverse, from what I understand.
Very much.
So you've got really about as unbiased a group of people and a process as you can get.
Do you have a list of names there?
I don't,
Do you
no.
know? Well, I'm not remembering all of them, but Billy Martin, Linda Addison,
Lee Thomas.
Lee Thomas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I wish I
On
could
the
remember the
spot,
entire
I know,
list.
on the
yeah.
spot.
Linda
we-
Addison? What are those?
Yeah, Linda.
Linda,
Yeah, that's
okay,
what I
yeah.
said.
For some
second.
reason I remembered
Yes.
her name, yeah.
And who won the Lifetime Achievement Award this year.
For the Bram Stokers.
Oh yeah, that's right. Congrats, Linda.
Sure, fourth Bram Stoker, isn't it, or fourth award?
Yeah, but this is Lifetime
This is
Achievement.
Lifetime
I know.
This is the big
Achievement,
tackle.
Oh, you mean coming up this
Yeah.
year?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's great, yeah.
Yeah.
Good for her.
Yeah.
God, I love her. We all do.
And she's amazing.
Yeah,
What's
she
not to love?
surely is, yeah. You got some questions?
Yeah, so John, we're going to get into the genesis of the Twisted Book of Shadows in our next segment with Christopher Golden.
As you
But but can you tell us a bit about how this anthology is funded and what happens if the goals aren't met?
Yeah, that also was mostly Chris was the driver behind this. We were considering different options, and Kickstarter brings with it a whole level, or many levels, that add to a fund program.
I don't
Gold-
understand. What,
Usually
Perks.
there's
Perks. Oh, okay.
level.
a lot of
All right.
perks. and-
Yeah,
rewards?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So that ends up like adding a lot, taking away from our prime goal of just the best stories, paying pro rates.
Oh,
So
pro rates.
pro
Well,
rates.
that's really one of the main challenges we wanted to face on this one was we don't want to have an anthology starting out that can't pay professional rates.
Right.
Wow.
So the GoFundMe is our way of doing it without having to fill it with perks that would take away from the financial. Chris, Jim, and I, we know that we're probably very unlikely to get anything out of this. In fact,
Yeah.
we're putting money into it ourselves.
Putting in a total of $1,000 between the three of us.
Yeah. So
And you're asking for how much?
the GoFundMe is at $6,000, and
Six,
we're
okay.
we're already about 75% of the way there.
Excellent. That's great.
So
That's
it's doing
great.
very well. Plus, we've been promised a pretty substantial, we can't say who from, but a pretty substantial addition to it. So we
You mean somebody's
really-
going to come in and make a donation?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
that's great.
And so we're very optimistic about this.
That's
We're
fantastic.
almost there.
That's fantastic.
And the entire purpose of that money, again, is to make sure that all the writers who are contributing to this are getting paid professional
Yeah.
rates.
That's pretty
If it's
important.
their
Yeah.
first story, if it's just another story that's,
It's a
under
great
their belt,
cause.
they're getting paid professional
Yeah.
rates.
And if
And
they're
anyone out there can get into there,
Yeah.
into this collection.
and if they're not members of the Horror Writers Association,
matter.
It
yet-
doesn't matter.
No, but I was going to say a sale like this could help them get into
as a
it.
member.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that could help them get
Yeah.
into the Horror Writers Association as an active member if it's a professional sale.
But it doesn't also, we don't want it just to focus on horror authors. A romance author out there who has a really good idea for a
Yeah.
spooky story,
Yeah.
a good horror
Oh,
story,
sure.
is
Yeah.
welcome to join in and throw their
Yeah.
story in there.
Well, that's again a part of the reason for the blind submissions, to make sure that we don't just look at horror writers.
It may be a moot point, but she asked about what happens if the goals aren't met.
Well, if the goals aren't met, in the worst case scenario, we'll just shorten the length of the book a little.
Exactly.
Okay, and but we're still,
Wow, okay.
it's still going to happen, and I'll be very surprised if we don't meet the goal.
How many stories do you plan on having?
16 to 18, I think it is, if it all works
Yeah,
out the
that
way you
sounds
want it
right.
to.
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
I think
That's great.
80,000 words is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
That
We
sounds
want to make
great.
it a good-sized book. We want to make it an anthology that people can enjoy. We don't want to just have 4 stories.
Right.
Yeah, sounds great. Hope it works out, and looking forward to reading the final product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're going to submit, right?
I
got a
don't know about that.
Personal
but-
question for Jim coming up here.
Oh, yes. So as one of the submission readers, what will you be looking for in a story? You sort of touched upon it a little bit, but maybe go a little deeper.
Well, it's the first thing I'm going to looking for is actually a good story. Period. Good starting points. Catch my attention from page 1, because if I get as many submissions as we're expecting to get, I may not be reading to page 10 unless you've gotten my attention already.
Right, yeah.
So a good starting paragraph, a good starting sentence, oomph
A
from the
hook.
beginning,
Yeah.
and a hook will all work in your benefit.
Yeah.
A
Remember
long,
the-
slow, languid ride down the river may not work in this case.
Yeah.
unless it's like the river Styx flows backwards.
Exactly.
Yeah, remember that feeling, when you watched The Sixth Sense? at the end. Yeah, if you can write a story that leaves us feeling like that at the end, we're like going, oh my God.
The
You know?
proper sense of dread
Yeah.
is not going to hurt my feelings.
I got a question for you now.
Yes.
As owner of Haverhill House Publishers, in the last year alone, you published collection/anthologies from Matt Bechtel, Christopher Golden, and one from Jim here.
Yes.
Can you tell us about those books and what goes into putting those together?
Well, from a publisher's standpoint, you just want to put out the best product you can. Matt, who was, well, actually Jim's This Is Halloween was the first short story collection we did, but that was more of a project, Jim's project that, you know,
John was
I
nice
worked-
enough to help me with.
and
You had it all done and just gave it to
yeah,
John, or-
yeah, but we edited, we set it up, and
Oh, okay.
the regular publishers work. But and we put the stamp on pretty much anything that Jim or Chris does. We'll have the River City Writers. This is a
local,
River
yep.
City Writers production. For Matt, the thing with Matt is we've known Matt for years and loved him, and have loved him for years. Matt has one of the most intriguing minds,
Imagination.
and his imagination. But Matt was always the guy who said, you know, when are you going to publish these stories? No, they're not good enough. They're not, you know, I'm just, you know. So when I finally started Haverhill House, I said, I'm going to make Matt write those, put the stories together and send them to me. And, you know, and he did. And, you know, they've done very well. And
It's a great collection of stories.
I
He
think
wasn't
he
giving
has,
himself enough credit as far as I'm
yeah,
concerned.
I
I
think
think
he
you're
has,
right. Yeah, it really is good. I've read it,
Yeah.
obviously. Yeah.
every rating he's got on Amazon has been a 5-star.
5-star.
Wow, that's
you know.
fantastic.
So yeah, and his process, and in that new story he's got with the Wicked Haunted, is another one that just kind of
Knocks you down. Yep.
Wow, what a thought process.
How can he do that? Yeah.
So yeah, so these are, and of course, I like the stories. That from, you know, that's my bias. I'm not just going to grab a collection of stories from whoever submits them. I've got to like what I read, and so yeah, it's. I'm not going to. I don't like bloody gore. That's
Okay.
you know, if you're trying to shock someone, don't send it. You know, but if you write really well and you've got some, send that along.
We're going to talk about Crowley in a minute, but how did you put together One Bad Week?
Well, One Bad Week is actually a collection of short stories I've done over the years, and most of them actually were directly connected together. And they were done partially as promotion for when I was doing a series of Crowley novels. For example, Little Boy Blue, which is one of the stories in there, was set up to start people, to catch people's attention for the Crowley stories that were coming up.
Really?
And that was followed by Vendetta, which ended up, I have this tendency to write stories that are much longer than they're supposed to be.
You think?
People have cracked wise about this with me more than a few times. So that was supposed to be a 5,000 word story, and ended up being, I think, almost 17,000 words.
Wow.
And a couple more short stories along the way, and they just, people keep asking when they can get these things together, and I finally went, well, maybe I can work that out.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. Those are great stories.
Thank you kindly.
Excellent. It,
Yeah, and Rufo the clown has got to be one of the most original.
We're going to be talking
Yeah.
about Rufo.
Okay, so I won't go there. But, yeah.
Okay, while we're on the subject of Haverhill House, getting away from anthologies, let's go to novels. I'm only going to talk about one.
Okay.
It's one of the best novels I've read from this particular author, but all of last year, it was just so profound, so just a great read. It hit me right in the gut. And that's called Waiting by Rick Ottala.
Rick Hoddle.
Tell us a little bit about Waiting.
Well, Waiting was the last novel that Rick finished before he passed in 2013. And he had actually submitted it to Rick Chasmar at
Cemetery Dance.
Dance. Thank you. And Cemetery Dance does a fantastic product, but it takes a little while to get them
Yeah.
out. So it did stay with them for a while, but I knew I wanted that book to come out. And,
Wow.
and so Holly Newstein Haudela was good enough to let us publish it.
Good for
And
her.
and Rick, like Charles Grant, is also a master of quiet horror that kind of grabs you behind the neck and
Yep.
leaves you
Lifts you
gasping.
up by
Shows
the
your
scruff.
profit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. This is another thing that I'm going to ask you. There's rumors about another book that you guys might publish of Rick's, something that was,
Well, I'm talking with, nothing's set in stone yet, but Rick, a lot of his work was paperback original, has never seen a hardcover. And especially Moon Death, Nightstone, Winter Wake, those things, should
Little Brothers,
make a
yeah.
beautiful little, but that made hardcover.
That?
There was a special edition, but I, being a collector, know that there's a number of people that would love to see a hardcover of Nightstone on their shelf. And
so you're thinking about it anyways.
nothing. Holly thinks it's a good idea, and we haven't gone over the
The rights
or
and,
anything. But
Okay.
but it's something I'm really would like to do.
Amen.
You're up.
So Jim, as mentioned, One Bad Week was released from Haverhill House, and it's made up of stories which feature your character, Jonathan Crowley, and guest appearances from Rufo the Clown. Can you give our viewers some background on Crowley and Rufo, and perhaps offer an opinion on why your fans love these characters so much?
I'm kind of amused by both of them, really. I didn't expect the responses that I've gotten. First off, when I created Jonathan Crowley, what I wanted to create was just a complete bastard of a character. And didn't really expect anything to happen from it, but almost immediately that was the first thing that I wrote that I got fan mail on. Including in this one, it made me scratch my head more times than I care to think about. Several women who really would like to get to know Crowley better.
Oh, jeez.
Well, first off,
The bad
I
boy.
described him as plain. Brown hair, brown eyes, average straight across the board. The only thing he's got going for him is a slightly mean smile. So the only thing that they're attracted to is his personality. And I'm like, you realize he's a jackass, right? You understand that he's literally one of the meanest people you'll ever run across. And they still say yes, and I want him.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah.
Which, like, dear 16-year-old Jim, I should go back in time and just make you be a prick. At which point your world would be so much better, apparently. But no, it works in fiction. I don't think it works in the real world, and I just can't be that guy. But he's a monster hunter. It's what he does.
He's immortal, too.
Yes, he is immortal, which sometimes sounds great, but I've always firmly believed that's a horrible idea. Everybody you know is going to die before you. And in this case, as he's learned repeatedly, sometimes life hurts. I did a scene in Serenity Falls where there's a pack of undead dogs chasing after him.
Oh my
He
God.
takes one look at them, turns tail, and runs for dear life. His only thinking at that point is, they're going to tear me apart, and I'll eventually get better. And in the meantime, every nerve ending in my body is going to hurt. So he's as brave as he wants to be sometimes. He's a bit of a coward. He has actually considered whether or not people could be used as human shields in certain situations. No hesitation whatsoever. But at the end of the day, he's trying to do the right thing. Rufo the Clown has certain morals that are along the same lines as Crowley's. Neither of them likes to see kids picked on, for example. The difference is that Rufo the Clown would kill a kid in a heartbeat if it suited his mood. Because Rufo is a dead, insane clown. He's a very happy, cheerful man until you take him off. I did a novel called Smile No More.
My favorite. Absolutely my favorite.
Well,
That was a hoot.
one of the things I absolutely loved about that was how many people said I was rooting for Rufo until he did this horrible, horrible thing. I'm like, that's because he's the bad guy. He's not a nice person. I just hoped you would get a little sympathy for him along the way before he once again did something that was an atrocity. Well, they ran across each other in the Serenity Falls trilogy. It was not a meeting that went well for either of them. It was one of those times where Crowley discovered that, yes, being burned alive is uncomfortable. And people have requested a rematch more than once, and that's really one of the reasons that I did the entire book.
Wow.
Was the novella at the beginning of this is called Back to Serenity. And it is the story of Jonathan Crowley, once again running across Rufo the Clown, who he thought was already dead.
Wow.
Problem is, Rufo tends to not die well.
We got that.
He's a little stubborn.
Smile No More must be one of the bloodiest books I think I'd read. It was.
Thank you.
Oh, it was. I loved it. No, I'm glad you're happy.
I had a blast writing it.
I'll just never forget reading that book, and just my mouth was open, I think, for almost the whole thing. And I didn't know you that well then, but I remember saying to you, Jim, this is the most bloody thing. I said, bring buckets, when you read this, because it's going to be filled with blood. And he laughed. He just thought it was the greatest thing, and so did I. So a great job.
The one catch with doing Rufo the Clown was I had to do a clown that wasn't the Joker. DC Comics has done a wonderful job with the Joker over the years. And one of the things that I had to do was think of ways to use him that weren't a riff on that.
Wow.
2 words for readers: potato stamps.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to just transition to this book called The Hell Within that you wrote with Charles Rutledge. It just came out last week. It's the 3rd of the series.
Griffin and Price.
Griffin and
series.
Price, and I have that down here. And they're 2 of your most endearing characters, as opposed to Crowley and Rufo. Can you give us some background on those characters and the journey the novel took to publication?
So the thing about it is, Charles and I are both from the South. There's a certain feel to Southern life that's drastically different than you get just about anywhere else. And it was important to both of us that we reflect that properly in the stories. So what you have is 2 good old boys. Good old boy and the redneck are not the same thing. In this case, you have a good old boy sheriff who's perfectly content running around in his town and just making sure that things run smoothly. And his best friend from high school, who ran off to be a mercenary for several years, and has come back and would like to settle into a calmer life in the South. Unfortunately for both of them, nothing will ever be calm around them.
Because they live in this place where another dimension can easily manifest itself.
They live in Wellman, and Wellman is a lovely little town where, yes, unfortunately there are rifts into other worlds and other dimensions that seem to attract trouble. So the first book they dealt with what Charles affectionately refers to as rednecks from the outer dark. The second book they dealt with holy roller vampires. They will give you eternal life. It's going to cost dearly. And in the third book, they deal with a serial killer who happens to use demons as his weapon of choice.
Wow.
Just a quick note on that. A Hell Within has an extended ending, or at least I consider it. It just goes on and on. It is brutal and bloody, and it is great. I mean, it's every horror fan's dream to read an extended ending like that, because it doesn't stop. It just keeps going and going. And you go, whew, and then you turn the page and it starts all over again. It's fantastic.
Both Charles and I want those books to be very fast-paced.
And they are. Yeah.
So the scenes are short and clipped deliberately, and to my knowledge, there's still no chapter headings for any of it.
I didn't notice that, but yeah, okay.
There are no chapters, they're just scenes. If you're going to read one more chapter, that's not going to work.
That's not going to work.
So, John, aside from what we've talked about, what's coming up from Haverhill House and from you personally?
Well, the Twisted Book of Shadows. Got a couple things in the workings. Actually, I'm trying to keep them a little bit quiet until one of them a quick. It's a concept I came up with, and it's a 2-volume set with 5 novellas in each.
Nice.
And it. I really don't want to let it out of the bag yet, because I've got a few people that are possibly lined up for it, but it's definitely a unique idea. It's not horror centric. It's
Just a good story.
just good stories.
We won't twist your
and
arm
The
much.
well, mainly I just give each of the authors a key word, and I don't tell them there are no guidelines, there are no rules, just
Wow,
go
so
with
that's
that
the
word.
prompt.
Yep. And so it's going to be fun. And
Cool.
Tony knows.
I know. I actually written the
wrote a
story,
story.
and,
Cool.
and I sent it out to be edited, and I know he's going to get mad at me, but the feedback was really, really good.
Do I get mad?
I think you're going to really like it. Well, I told you the synopsis anyways, but
Yes,
you're really
yes.
going to like it. Yeah, it's great.
So, and for me, well, I've hit a little bit of a stone wall with the last novel I wrote because, well, unfortunately, no one will even read it. A lot of people have read it, but as far as publishers or agents, because of the subject matter, which isn't a bad subject matter, it's because of who wrote it. I don't want to go into much detail too on that, but so I've sent it out to 60 agents and publishers, and they don't even ask to see. You know,
Right,
I'll,
right,
you know,
yeah.
some of them I send the
First chapter.
first chapters or
yeah.
whatnot, but immediately comes back. This is not for us.
Wow.
It's a good book, and he's fighting an it's not even ethnicity. It's
No,
a race type.
A race type thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll quickly put it. I've had a teacher in Nevada, who was a high school teacher, said this should be required reading in every class. It's about two young African American sisters from 1961 New Orleans, and the sisters end up separated because the older sister gets an offer that will bring her to Boston. And in 1961, Leslie College was one of the only colleges in America, actually the only college in America that would accept African American women. So she jumped on the opportunity, and tragedy happens when she leaves, and she ends up feeling guilty that it's because I left my family. This
It's a
is
great
happening.
book. It's a really good book.
And the younger sister, who ends up in a really bad situation after the tragedy happens, feels that her only family left is with her sister. So she decides to take it on herself to take a walk to go north and
Wow.
It's a
catch up with her sister.
historical coming of age novel, and it's very, very affecting. It's a really good read.
So is it the voice that they're?
I say it from their point of view.
Yeah.
And why I did that is one, as far as female point of views, having 5 daughters,
Yeah,
ex-wives,
sure, yeah.
and 2 sisters,
Sure, yeah.
and a wife.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot of
Mm-hmm.
point of view, and Mad Wilson said I've done very good at that part of it, and also not being a female, not being an African American, I wanted to challenge myself, and more than all of that, as I wanted to really, you say, wow, things were so bad, but to really submerge yourself into that story, and holy crap, I mean, I came out of there sweating at times. What the torment and what they went through in those years. And it's something I wouldn't have learned not writing that. And the research, I researched Route 1, well, it's now 110, but from New Orleans up to New York, I researched every little town that she stopped in on the way.
Wow.
And people say, well, yeah, she wouldn't have lived, but there's a reason why she makes it. And she finds someone along the way that just might be her guardian angel. So
We're running low on time
Okay,
here.
I'm sorry.
I hope it finds a
I
home.
hope so too.
It will one way or another.
Yeah.
It will.
Just might take a while.
It might take a while.
We've
Yeah,
got one last question. We're going to do away with the readings because we had so much fun talking.
yeah,
We're
I
gonna.
talk too much.
No, not you. I mean, all of us.
No, Jim. Okay,
This was
Jim talks.
interesting. Jim talks.
Oh, you?
Yep. It's the. I want you to talk about spores a little bit because I just found out about that, and I think it's a great concept. But also talk a little bit about Tides of War because that's coming out next. It's already came out.
The second book came out.
Yeah.
I've just finished writing the third book about a month ago, and I'm waiting to get the edits back with a great deal of trepidation and fear, as I do with every book, because it's a very different series for me. Spores is a science fiction end of the world novel, much along the lines of Days of the Triffids, etc. And basically, it starts with things going bad and then only getting worse. It is relentless, and it's not finished yet because dealing with that level of relentlessness is kind of a challenge.
Exhausting.
It is. I'm going to be finishing that probably next, and that's going to be coming out from Earthling Publications.
Ooh.
I can't say exactly when. It might be late this year. It might be next year.
Okay, so we have to
You are-
wait then.
They're waiting on me to finish writing the book.
You are a machine.
Well, you've also got 4 of these
You
books
really
in the
are.
Tides of War, right? There's
There'll be
4?
3 books in the Tides of War, 4 books so far in the Seven Forges series, and possibly 3 more there. I'm waiting to find out.
Jeez. And these are thick books. I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking, what, 120,000, 140,000 words?
They are more.
115 each.
Yeah.
I
Amazing.
also have another Griffin and Price novella coming with Charles, probably out in October. We should write that soon.
Well, we've run out of time.
Well-
Thank you so much. This has been well, you're going to be
Of course.
back. But,
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
oh, thank you.
I
It
wanna
was
thank-
great seeing you, great talking
Truly
to
a
you.
pleasure.
Yes.
So we've got a bunch of books for you to take a look at. Well, we didn't talk about Chris's yet, but A Hell Within, Waiting, hopefully Going North one of these days.
Gone North. Yep.
one of these days, yeah. Tides of War. Jonathan Crowley, Rufo the Clown, so much. Thanks again, gentlemen.
Jonathan
Yeah.
Crowley Chronicles will be coming out from Haverhill Press in the not too distant future.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's another one I hadn't heard about. That's great.
The women must be very happy about
Thanks, gentlemen. We'll be back in a minute with Christopher Golden.
Very good.
We're back. We got a new guest with us.
It's like Jim turned into me. It was like Bert from Soap. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes,
And
yeah.
it would disappear.
But you don't get to be great.
I don't get. No, I'm not.
The
no.
good Christopher Golden.
The adequate. The adequate.
The adequate Chris Golden.
The semi all right. Yeah, exactly.
just Chris.
This is Jim Gold. Jim Gold.
That's his brother.
Oh my God. Oh, this is gonna be fun.
Does your wife know how much you're in love with
Oh
Jim?
no. All right. This is Christopher Golden. You're gonna read his bio.
Oh, I am. That's right. Okay, so Christopher Golden is the New York Times best-selling author of such novels as Ararat, Snowblind, Tin Men, The Myth Hunters, Wildwood Road, The Boys Are Back in Town, The Ferryman, Strangewood, and of Saints and Shadows. He has also written books for teens and young adults, including Poison Ink, Soulless, and the thriller series Body of Evidence, honored by the New York Public Library and chosen as one of Young Adult Library Services Association's best books for young readers.
Congratulations.
Very cool.
We're gonna run out of time.
We got another paragraph to go.
With Mike Mignola, Golden created 2 cult favorite comic book series, Baltimore and Joe Golem, a cult detective. As an editor, he has worked on the short story anthologies Seize the Night, The New Dead, and Dark Cities, among others. He's written and co-written comic books, video games, screenplays, a BBC radio play, the online animated series Ghosts of Albion, along with Amber Benson, and a network television pilot. A frequent speaker at conferences, schools, and libraries, Golden is also co-host of the podcast 3 Guys with Beards and Defenders Dialogue, and the founder of the Merrimack Valley Halloween Book Festival.
Right here.
You can skip that last bit. We don't care.
He once climbed Mount Everest in a bikini.
right.
Go ahead and read it.
Oh, yeah, Golden was
They were
born
already
and
sick
raised
of
in
me.
Massachusetts, be quiet, where he still lives with his family. His original novels have been published in more than 14 languages in countries around the world. Please visit him at www.christophergolden.com not jamesmoore.com.
Exactly. I'm going to change the name of my website.
Yeah.
Not James.
Yeah, not James. The adequate.
The adequate. Yeah.
Are we done now? Is this?
We're done.
Okay,
We're out of
all right.
time,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, we're out of
I
time.
need a break. Can I take a break?
Again, welcome, Chris. Welcome
Thank you.
to the
Yes.
show.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Yes. We discussed quite a bit about the Twisted Book of Shadows with John and Jim, but what we didn't discuss the why of the anthology.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how the whole thing came about?
Absolutely. I mean, I have been, by the way, thanks for the advertising on your
Yes.
shirt, Tony, for the Merrimack Valley Halloween Book Festival.
Green.
You know, we grew up, our whole generation grew up reading phenomenal horror anthologies, and although I've written in so many different genres, I still say, you know, I'm a horror guy, and the horror people are my people, and those anthologies and those stories allowed me to discover so many writers that I'd never heard of. And in those days, I think there were a lot more opportunities for writers who weren't already marquee names to have an ability to get into mainstream anthologies. And these days, I've edited a bunch of anthologies for mainstream publishing, and in order to get a mainstream publisher to buy an anthology, anthologies aren't historically a great seller for them, and that is only getting worse.
Sure is.
So to try to get them to buy one, you have to load it up with people who are going to be persuasive on their end. So you can't fill it with people they've never heard of before. And it's frustrating, especially because I see anthologies that are being done on a regular basis by small press publishers that pay nothing or next to nothing
Yeah.
and no royalties and
Yeah.
all this stuff. And I just thought that we needed a platform, an anthology that would allow for writers to get paid professional rates, to get paid professional royalties, and to have an equal chance so that everybody has a level playing field going in. And Jim and I talked about it, and he was like, yeah, I've been wanting to do that forever. And so we had talked about it for a while, for a couple of years. So we said, we have to do this eventually. And then we realized, look, if we don't do it now, we're never going to do it. And we had talked to John about it, and then it just became this thing. We thought, well, we have to raise the money so that we can pay professional rates. And so that was really important. But over time, what became so much more important to me is this idea of blind submissions, is this idea of encouraging writers who don't think that they have a shot, writers who look at these three white, straight, middle-aged dudes, and think, oh, well, they're not going to buy my story, whatever. And again, I've done a lot of anthologies, and I've always tried to really make an effort to make sure that there were a lot of women in these anthologies, but it's got to be more than that. So reaching out to, as far as we can go online to spread the word that we want diverse voices, and yet at the same time, it's blind submissions. So everybody has the same shot, and this is
That's
what
great.
this is what we wanted more than anything else. Is that maybe you're somebody who's a New York Times bestseller, and you send us a story where you've just phoned it in, and maybe you're somebody that has never sold a story before, and you write something fantastic. And I wanted to make sure that we buy the story that's fantastic, not the story
Not the
that's
name.
by somebody
Yeah.
whose name is going to sell
Yeah.
the book.
Yeah.
How
Why don't you
often?
read- oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, how often do you see an anthology that pays professional and is solely on merit, on
Right.
story merit, not
Yep,
on
only on
Oh,
merit,
yeah, never.
you know.
Why don't you skip to question 3?
Yeah, so we talked earlier about what type of stories Jim and John are looking for. Can you tell us what you're not looking for and what would cause the story to be rejected?
Okay, so from my perspective, we're talking about taste, right? Because what I'd like to say is, we want your best horror stories. And how you define horror story, that's up to you. And I don't want to be the one to say it can't be a serial killer story, because if it's really good, then we'll buy it.
Right.
If it's, I don't want to say, oh, don't send us vampire stories, or don't send us werewolf stories. If Stephen Graham Jones does a werewolf story,
Yeah.
we won't know it's him, but the
Right.
point is the story will be great. And so it isn't a question of don't write a vampire story, don't write a werewolf story, don't write a serial killer story. It's write a great
Write a
horror
good,
story.
yeah.
And how you define horror, like I said, I mean, Charlie Grant and Skip Inspector at my first Nikon in 1989, you know, they had it out over quiet horror versus splatterpunk, and we don't care. Those are all horror. The question is, what do you think is the best horror story?
So once a story is accepted, John, can you tell us what happens after that? For example, the need for editing, who will approve the final edits, and who will choose the artwork and cover?
Well, we're open to, we have a couple people already who expressed interest in doing the covers.
Nice.
And they're both, the two I've seen are exceptionally good.
Great.
And once a story is, I usually try to get 3 edits before it hits the print. And because, as I learned with my first novel, even after 3 edits, there's a lot of bleeding on that page.
So you have a team in place
Yeah.
already of editors for the stories?
Yes. One of our go-to is Linda Nagel, who's very in-depth with her editing.
Who's also
Well, we
been
haven't,
off-
I'm going to interrupt because we haven't really talked about this to begin with. I mean, the first edit is going to be from us.
From you guys, yes.
So,
definitely.
Yeah.
and we pull no punches.
Right.
So, and then of course it's great. Hopefully it is Linda because she'll
Yeah.
do a fantastic job and catch a bunch of stuff that we missed. But we'll be doing the first
Yeah.
edit.
Oh, that's
Usually
great.
there'll probably be 3 edits before it gets to
Right.
Linda as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And when do you foresee this being released, Chris? And in what formats do you think you'll be
I think
releasing
you said
it
the
in?
S word, right?
Did I swear?
No, September.
You're high.
I know.
Look, the reality is
I didn't
that
say
the
which
way
year.
that we're doing this, we don't know if this thing is, it's open for submissions for the entire month of February.
Okay.
And we're going to continue to promote the fact that it's open to submissions and that we want submissions from everybody.
Yeah. You may
We
not
might
get
get,
enough.
we might get
Yeah.
100 stories.
Right.
We might get 1,000 stories.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
when this book comes out will be entirely determined by how many stories
Yeah.
we get.
You're more
Makes
likely to get
sense.
1,000
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
submissions.
So
Yeah.
my point is that, and I also, by the way, I want to encourage people not to submit multiple stories.
Or trunk stories,
Yeah,
please.
yeah,
Save
I
us
mean-
the trouble.
If nobody else has bought it, don't send it to us. You're wasting our time and your time. And I'd really rather not have multiple submissions from the same author. We want your best horror story.
Yeah.
And you can't have 2 that are your best. We want the one.
Yeah.
How about simultaneous submissions?
No problem with simultaneous submissions. If you
Really?
sell it before we come back to you and say we want it, particularly because if I can't tell you how long it's going to take us to get back to
Right.
you, I can't tell you not to send it somewhere else.
That's really fair and kind.
And admirable. That's
Yeah.
great. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not, look, I mean,
Well, most
We're not-
markets don't do that.
Right,
So,
well, and it
Well,
just-
you don't have a reputation as being fair and kind. So this
yeah. So this is very strange.
odd.
This is
my
odd.
thing is I don't want anybody to be in a situation like so many people have been in with markets like, and again, I'm not knocking them. I understand what they do and why they do it, but
Yeah.
like with Borderlands, people have had their stories at Borderlands for years, and it's a
Yeah.
single
Yeah.
submission. You can't send it to other
Yeah.
markets. All we would ask is that if you sell the
Right,
story,
let us know.
you contact us
Yeah.
and tell us that it's no longer in contention, that we should pull it from submission.
Yeah, I know some markets that don't have that long a period of holding on to it, but they just don't want to fall in love with it and then find out that it's going somewhere else,
Well, I mean,
which is
that would be
yeah.
sad, but
Yeah,
look, you know,
right.
we're about writers' rights.
Exactly.
You know, I mean,
Yep.
we're about supporting the writer.
Yep, that's
So
awesome.
if he can sell it somewhere else, more power to him.
Absolutely, or
that's
her.
really cool.
Or her. I'm sorry.
No
but
reprints.
no reprints. Yeah,
Yeah.
please don't
Yeah,
even.
that makes sense.
Before we get off of this subject,
Yeah.
do you want to read the names of the?
Yeah, we talked about the idea that
Yeah.
when we wanted to make sure that we had, Jim and I understand the fact, and John, we all understand the fact that because we are who we are, we have potentially an inherent bias. We might read a story that's well written, but but it doesn't strike us the same way it might strike somebody else because we don't have that experience. And that could be a totally unconscious thing. So even though we're encouraging people from diverse backgrounds and from marginalized communities to submit stories, we wanted to make absolutely certain that we had different minds reading these things. And so we actually reached out to a bunch of people to say, can you come in and read along with us as an editorial committee so that we can make sure that we're not missing anything great because of our perspective. So we've got an amazing lineup of editors and writers. Nadia Balkin, Gabino Iglesias, Linda Addison, who's this year's Lifetime Achievement recipient from the HWA. We had Lee Thomas and Billy Martin, who I can't even believe he's giving us the time with everything on his, with all of them. I mean, this is the amazing thing, right? So Lamar Giles and Rachel Autumn Deering and Kale Pereira, I think I covered everybody, but the amazing thing about this is that every single one of these people said yes. And I mean, when you reach out to somebody and say, hey, we might get 1,000 stories or more, and we're
They were
asking you
okay
to
with
read
that.
them for free, and I mean, it's possible that we could end up that they could end up getting some money out of the thing in the distant future. But if they do, it won't be much. You know, what we've said is, like, if Jim and I specifically, if we make any money, because we're putting our own money into it, if we make any money at some point, then they'll get something. But they really know that the chances are they're going to put a ton of hours into this thing for no compensation whatsoever.
Well, for the love of the genre, for the love of the
Well,
sport for the
because
writers.
they understand what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Every single person said yes.
So most of them don't have beards then, right?
Most of them, Billy has a little bit of a beard, and I think I don't know. Does Gabino have a beard? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
But no, but maybe they'll grow them. You know, I hope Lee doesn't grow one though, because he's so damn handsome. It would ruin it.
All right, we've got to get off of this because we're running out of time, and I got a few other questions to ask you.
Sure.
I want to talk about your collection of stories you've written with collaborators. It's called Don't Go Alone. Can you tell us a little bit about your process when you do collaborate? And I'd like you to use A Hole in the World as an example of how you collaborate.
Look, every collaboration is different. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone, because Jim and I have collaborated on a lot of different things, but every time we collaborate differently. In the case of A Hole in the World, you know, Tim had been asked, I think, to do a story for, what is the name of that series? That Jeff...
Oh,
yeah, Snafu, thank you.
okay.
And you know, it's sort of military and monsters
Yep.
and all of that stuff. And Tim was like, hey, I just got asked to do this. It would be a really fun opportunity for us to get to do something together again. So we started talking about what we want to do, and you know, it's just about what ideas you have hanging around, and you bump things off each other until you come up with an idea. And mine was this idea of, you know, methane explosions in Siberia, creating these holes in the world, and the idea that something might be down there, and you know, when the methane blows a hole up, that something might follow.
It's my favorite story of last year. I mean, I just absolutely love this story.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
We had a blast, and we had a really good time with it. But yeah, I mean, it's every single collaboration is different. Usually, I say it's like playing tennis. It depends on the circumstance. Jim and I just recently, the copies of Bloodstained Wonderland are going out now, and that's a good example again of the sort of tennis idea, although it took us 10 years. But it's, you know, you write a scene or a chapter and you send it to the collaborator, and they revise what you did and then
Add on.
and
Well, you've got a question about Bloodstain. What is
Yeah,
question
so
eight?
that's your latest release, Bloodstained Wonderland.
Right.
And that's a collaboration with the great James A. Moore. So can you...
Are you contractually obligated to?
Spreading.
Can you give our viewers a background on that series? That's a pretty dark series.
So it is really dark, and it's funny because, you know, because of the stuff that he wrote in his early horror career, people assume that Jim is the one who made it as dark as it is, because I'm usually fairly amiable.
Jim's over there smiling.
Yeah, but as he knows, I've been the one who said, yeah, let's get this nastier than it is. It started on an elevator at Stoker Weekend or whatever it was in New York. We were just joking about something about vampire creatures, like, and Oz, and it was a joke. And we just, by the time the elevator hit the lobby, we looked at each other and went, we have to write this. And we wrote
great.
Bloodstained Oz, and then probably immediately we had these ideas for 2 sequels. So the second one was Bloodstained Wonderland, and the third one, which we haven't started yet, but will not take 10 years,
Washington,
is called
DC?
Bloodstained Neverland.
Wow.
And once we finished the first one, we started to construct this sort of background narrative of what's really going on and why it's happening and where the vampires come from and the Emerald Heart of Oz and who the wizard is and all of this stuff. And it's been a blast.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
And
the second
Bloodstained
one.
Neverland takes place in Bloodstained Wonderland is out now. It takes place in London during the Blitz.
That's cool.
Bloodstained
great.
Neverland, which we haven't written yet, will take place in San Francisco during the Summer of Love.
Oh,
That's
fun.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah, I've got I read the first one. In fact, if anybody's got the first edition of that, it was going for as much as $800 or something on eBay.
Yeah. Once upon a time, before anything else was published with it, I think that the Bloodstained Oz in hardcover, because there are only 500 copies of it, was going for $1,500 or $2,000, which is insane. Don't ever pay that for a book. What's wrong?
And then I brought my copy here last time Jim was here, and I didn't. I'm just looking at it and thinking, well, I saw it as high as $200, and he says it's gone as high as $850. Kind of took it and put it away.
Yeah.
We're gonna abbreviate this a little bit. I got one more question for you, Chris,
Yeah.
and then she's gonna have you wrap it all up for us. Going back to collaborations again, you and Tim Levin have got the first of a new series coming out.
It's actually not. It's a standalone novel.
It is. I
Yeah.
thought it was a series.
No. It's called Blood of the Four.
I'm wrong.
And it is a standalone epic fantasy. The idea is that, and again, it's possible that sometime in the future we may write a book in that world, but we have no plans to do that right now. The idea was to get in, get out. It's long. It's 150,000 words.
Yeah.
It's a big book.
It is.
But our intention was to make it something that somebody who loves epic fantasy but doesn't want to commit to something that might last until after we're dead. I mean, you have these things. People are waiting for George R.R. Martin. They're praying he doesn't die before he finishes his books. And other authors have died before finishing their series.
Right.
And so, we just wanted to do something that would be in that vein, but give them something that was a complete story, complete world, everything in one book.
Violence, fantasy, blood,
Magic,
magic.
a little bit of romance. It's a blast.
Yeah, it is.
It's a blast. We loved writing that book, and we're working on something else potentially together in the same vein, but it's not, it's not the same world right now. So we'll see.
Okay. I've got up to page, I think 120 so far, and I'm
Cool.
loving it. I'm really
Good.
enjoying it.
Well, I also, I know we have to wrap up, but I know you guys talked about Dallas Mayer earlier, and I'd be remiss in not just mentioning. I know we don't have time to really talk about it much, but a huge loss, as anybody who's watching this probably already knows. And I have a million stories about Dallas, but we don't have time to tell them. The only thing I will say is one thing I did say today is if you have ever read anything by Jack Ketchum, my recommendation is that you pick up his short story collection, Peaceable Kingdom, as an introduction to the breadth of what he was capable of doing, because so many people only know him from The Woman or from The Girl Next Door, which, I mean, again, phenomenal work, but to get a picture of what he was capable of, I would recommend picking up Peaceable Kingdom, and he'll be missed.
Yeah. I
For
got to.
non-horror readers, Red is probably also.
I got to interview him for when he received the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2015. So in the souvenir book, I have an interview with him about that, which I'll always treasure now.
33 years. I met him in '84.
Yeah, crazy.
One last question.
So, John, do you want to take us out of this segment with a recap on the Twisted Book of Shadows?
Well, not sure what's left to say except write and submit. Anyone can make it if they write a good enough story. It doesn't matter who you are. As we said, 3 to 8,000 words, 3 to 7,000.
3,000 words is an ideal minimum, but
Yeah.
if it's a little bit shorter, we'll live. And my attitude
So
toward
that's-
length is we can only pay up to 5,000 words. The cap in payment is 5,000 words, but you can write longer. I do that on all of mine so we can control the budget. But if it's longer than 8,000 words, it better be the greatest thing we've read that week. And if it's longer than 10,000 words, it better be the greatest thing we've ever read.
So yeah, and like we said, we don't know anybody who's like I said before. If it's a Joe Ledger story, we'll have a good idea where it came from.
If you're not Jonathan Mayberry, don't send a Joe Ledger story.
Right.
No, I guess the only other thing about the Twisted Book of Shadows I want to say is that send your stories in. It's open for the entire month of February. The announcement of where to send them will be up on the Facebook page for the Twisted Book of Shadows on January 31st in the evening. And we want your best. And also for those of you who aren't submitting, or even if you are, we're still about $1,500 shy of our goal for funding.
Yep.
I know we'll get there, but hopefully we'll get there with your help.
Yeah, sounds like a wonderful opportunity for writers.
Sure does.
For sure.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you
Been a-
guys.
Pleasure having you back.
The wonderful Christopher
John.
Golden.
Oh, that's even better than the great James A. Moore. I'll take that. The wonderful.
We'll have to incorporate that from
That's right.
now
I'll
on
take
all the way.
it. I'll take it.
The blood-stained wonderful.
Again, thanks to John, Jim, Chris. Great show, and no, we won't be back. This is it. We're not going to do a closing. So
Oh,
Yep.
right. So we'll see you next month, and rest in peace, Dallas.
rest in peace, Dallas. Thank you. Talk to you. See you later.